Do I at least get visitation rights to my sanity? I asked, forcing a half-smile to hide the bitterness in my voice. My lawyer chuckled dryly, scribbling something down as if he hadn't heard that line 1,000 times before. It wasn't a laughing matter, not by a long shot, but humor was about the only thing holding me steady at that point. My name is Jack Callahan. I was 62 years old when my neatly organized life began to unravel, quietly at first, then with the speed and precision of a sniper's bullet. Salt and pepper hair, sharp suits, and a disciplined fitness regimen had long been part of my armor, an armor I developed over 3 decades as a Marine officer. Since retiring as a colonel, I traded fatigues for tailored suits, working in international diplomacy, mediating disputes between governments. Years of negotiations taught me that words could achieve what guns never could. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm in Annapolis, Maryland, a historic town that carried a quiet dignity I appreciated. Home was an elegant colonial house overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, peaceful waters reflecting sunsets I once shared comfortably with Diane, my wife of nearly 30 years. Diane was sharp-minded, restless in thought, and always one to challenge conventional wisdom. Her quick wit had initially drawn me to her, and even after all these years, she kept me on my toes. Yet lately, something had shifted between us, subtle at first, less conversation at dinner, shorter glances, and an unsettling distance I tried to ignore. It was summer, a Saturday afternoon, the heat of late June pressing heavily against the windows when the first red flag waved in front of me. Diane had gone shopping, or so she'd said, leaving her phone behind on the kitchen counter. It lit up once, twice, then again. I glanced down out of habit. 3 messages, one after another, from Tom Wilson, a family friend, a guy I'd known nearly 20 years. We used to barbecue in the backyard. He'd bring over his famous smoked brisket and always bragged about his homemade spice rub. Thinking of you again, the message read, and my stomach tightened as I read the next one. Wish we didn't have to hide. My chest tightened, breath catching as I stared at words never meant for my eyes. I wasn't a jealous type. I'd built a career on keeping calm and collected, but reading those messages felt like an ambush from friendly fire. It wasn't in my nature to confront without evidence, so I decided to be methodical. My heart pounded a little faster, but my face remained impassive. I grabbed a pen, jotting down the date and time, a Marine officer's instinct kicking in, document first, react second. Stay calm, Jack, I murmured under my breath. Facts, not emotions. That evening, Diane returned home, smiling casually, slipping off her lightweight jacket. Did you pick up anything interesting? I asked, keeping my voice neutral, eyes casually on the baseball highlights. Nothing much, she said lightly, barely glancing in my direction. Her voice was normal, calm, practiced, just browsing around downtown. She was a skilled conversationalist, but I'd learned enough from negotiating across tables of adversaries to recognize a bluff when I heard it. We ate dinner in silence, the ticking of the grandfather clock echoing through the dining room. Afterward, I excused myself to the study, closing the heavy oak door behind me, feeling the cool brass handle in my grip as I let out a controlled breath. Monday came slowly, tension mounting silently between Diane and me. She was careful, too careful, but no one could hide forever. That afternoon I called Mike Farrell, my old Army buddy, a mountain of a man who was fiercely loyal and reliable. Mike had served with me through the thickest jungles and the harshest deserts. His tattoo, an eagle clutching an anchor, reminded everyone of his loyalty to the Corps and those he'd fought alongside. I need a favor, I said into the phone. Something's off with Diane. I don't want this turning into a circus, but I need to be sure. There was a pause on the other end. Mike's voice finally came, low and reassuring. Jack, if you're calling me, you already know the answer. Just say the word. What do you need? Just watch, I said, keeping my voice steady. Quietly. Follow her around a bit. Nothing heavy-handed. Mike understood discretion better than most, having dealt with delicate situations before. He sighed, then said simply, consider it done. Days passed in a slow crawl. Every conversation with Diane felt measured, careful. My internal tension mounted with every polite exchange, every forced smile. At work, I still mediated high-stakes negotiations between hostile governments, my reputation built on composure, diplomacy, and decisive action. But at home, it was harder to maintain that facade. One evening, returning home late from the office, Mike was waiting in the driveway, his pickup parked discreetly across the street. He got out slowly. "Jack." He greeted me plainly, offering a firm handshake. "Mike." "Anything." He nodded, removing a small envelope from his jacket pocket. "There's no easy way to show you this." He handed over a set of photographs. Diane and Tom leaving a cafe in Baltimore, laughing comfortably. Another photo showed Diane, arm looped casually around Tom's, eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Thanks," I said quietly, throat tight, carefully keeping my voice level. Mike placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, steady and strong, without saying another word. Back in the house, I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, staring out at the darkness of the bay. My thoughts raced, but my face remained stoic. Emotional outbursts had never solved anything, and now wasn't the time to change tactics. Strategy, patience, and resolve, that was the way forward. No shouting matches, no confrontations. I needed facts, leverage, and a clear mind. The next day, my course was clear. I called an old friend, Robert Sinclair, a seasoned lawyer who specialized in complicated divorces and asset protection. "Robert," I began firmly, "I think it's time we met again." He chuckled knowingly. "That doesn't sound good, Jack. Want to tell me about it?" "Not on the phone. Tomorrow at your office." "You got it," he said calmly. "We'll get ahead of this." That evening Diane was out again, likely with Tom. The silence of the empty house was deafening, filled with the ghosts of laughter and whispered promises now broken. I poured another bourbon, glancing at the pictures Mike had given me, feeling the anger simmer beneath my controlled exterior. It wasn't betrayal itself that bothered me most. It was the deception, the disrespect, the slow erosion of trust I'd worked a lifetime to build. The phone buzzed again, this time my own. It was Diane, texting she'd be late. I replied politely, tapping out words carefully. "No worries. Take your time." The strategic lie tasted bitter, but necessary. My response wasn't weakness, it was a calculated maneuver. I needed more than proof. I needed a plan. As darkness fell over the Chesapeake, calm settled back over me like a familiar uniform. I wouldn't let this destroy me. I'd faced hostile dictators, tense international crises, and violent conflicts. But betrayal from the inside required a different type of warfare. One fought not with aggression, but with calculated, deliberate moves, each step carefully planned to ensure victory without compromising my honor. That night, alone in my study, I stared at the Marine Corps medal displayed prominently on the wall, illuminated by the dim lamplight. Integrity, discipline, strength. The words echoed in my mind. Diane had chosen deceit. Tom had chosen betrayal. I'd choose dignity. I'd choose control. The game had changed. I'd hold the high ground. But make no mistake, justice would be served, quietly, decisively, and on my terms. Morning broke over Annapolis. My lawyer, Robert Sinclair, awaited me at his downtown office, one of those historic brick buildings near State Circle, distinguished by a discreet brass plaque beside the entrance. "Good to see you again, Jack." Robert greeted me with a firm handshake, his eyes studying my expression carefully. He gestured toward the worn leather chair opposite his massive mahogany desk. "Sit down. Tell me what's going on." I settled into the chair, leaning forward slightly. "Robert, Diane is seeing someone else," I stated plainly, placing the photos Mike had provided on his desk. He took a moment to study them, eyebrows lifting just slightly. "Tom Wilson? Really?" "Unfortunately," I replied, maintaining composure. Robert exhaled slowly, setting down the images. "How do you want to handle this?" "I want to be thorough," I said, voice calm and controlled. "No drama, no shouting. Quietly put things in order. Protect my assets, ensure my future." Robert's expression shifted into an appreciative nod. "I expected nothing less from you, Jack. We'll do this by the numbers." Over the next hour, we mapped out a careful strategy. Diane had always preferred I handle our financial affairs, trusts, retirement accounts, real estate holdings, so I was already positioned advantageously. "Just one thing, Jack," Robert said cautiously, his fingers tapping the desk. "Are you sure you want to go down this road? There's no turning back." I met his eyes firmly. "Robert, I spent 35 years in uniform, facing tougher decisions than this." Diane made her choice. Now it's my turn. Days passed. the tension in our home palpable but unspoken. Diane continued her quiet routine. Meetings with her book club, volunteering at the library. Only now I noticed each absence, each excuse for what it truly was. Even at a small dinner party we hosted later that week, she carried herself with effortless grace, mingling through conversations, laughter floating easily from her lips. Tom Wilson and his wife, Beth, had been invited, part of our usual social circle, but this time I studied their interactions carefully, discreetly. Tom was seated across the table, clean-cut and charming as always, but tonight he shifted uneasily, eyes briefly catching mine, then darting away quickly. Diane moved comfortably through conversation, laughing with practiced ease, though her eyes betrayed caution. I felt a tightening in my chest but maintained my composure, as I learned long ago. My old neighbor, Eleanor Thompson, a retired schoolteacher who'd taught generations of Annapolis children, watched quietly from her seat at the far end of the table. She had an unsettling knack for observing details others missed, always asking quiet but penetrating questions. "So Jack," she asked, adjusting her glasses slightly, her book still resting on her lap. "You seem distracted tonight. Something on your mind?" I offered a gentle smile, meeting her steady gaze. "Nothing I can't handle, Eleanor. Just some delicate diplomacy at work." She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced but accepting my subtle deflection. "Diplomacy," she repeated thoughtfully. "A good diplomat knows how to hide trouble behind a friendly face." "Precisely," I said softly, holding her gaze an extra beat before turning my attention back to the table. As dinner wrapped up, I found Tom by the patio door, nursing a drink quietly. I approached slowly, stopping beside him without direct eye contact. "Beautiful night," I remarked casually. He stiffened, then forced himself to relax. "Yeah, it sure is. Summer evenings in Annapolis never disappoint." "You seem uncomfortable tonight, Tom," I said softly, voice calm but deliberate. "Everything all right?" He hesitated briefly. "Long day at work. You know how it is." I finally turned toward him, maintaining a calm gaze, my voice low and steady. "Tom, I've known you for 15 years. We've fished together. You've sat at my table more times than I can count. Anything you want to say to me?" His face paled slightly, eyes darting nervously around the room before settling back to mine. "Jack, there's nothing." I nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Understood. Enjoy your evening." I walked away calmly, feeling the quiet victory of rattling him without openly accusing. Strategy, patience, control. The next day, I arranged lunch with an old friend, Admiral Henry Cooper, Tom's superior at the consulting firm in Baltimore. We met at a quiet cafe near the Naval Academy, familiar territory for both of us. Henry was tall, imposing, disciplined. His tattoo, an old Army insignia from his days as a paratrooper, peeked from beneath his rolled-up sleeve. "So," Henry said, leaning back slightly, eyeing me carefully, "what brings us together, Jack? Work, or something personal?" "Something delicate," I replied evenly, choosing my words carefully. "Tom Wilson." Henry raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Tom? What's going on?" I paused deliberately, sipping coffee before continuing. "Let's just say I'm concerned about his judgment lately. His behavior isn't aligning with the kind of man you trust with sensitive information." Henry sat straighter, gaze sharpening. "Are you implying Tom's compromised?" I shook my head carefully, raising a hand slightly. "Nothing overtly professional, Henry, but his judgment lately has me concerned. I'm keeping this quiet because Tom's been a good friend, but I thought you should know." "As a friend." Henry studied me silently, then nodded firmly. "Say no more. I'll keep an eye out. Thanks for the heads up." Later that night, Diane and I sat in the living room, the silence thick and strained. I flipped through a newspaper, Diane pretending to read, clearly unsettled. "Jack," she said suddenly, lowering her book slightly. "You and Tom seem tense tonight. Did something happen?" I turned to face her, expression calm. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated briefly. "Just seemed off. You're usually close." I paused carefully, maintaining deliberate neutrality. "People change, Diane. Sometimes you discover someone isn't exactly who you thought they were." She quickly looked away, shifting in discomfort. "I suppose that's true," she murmured softly, unable to hold my gaze. The silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the old clock above the fireplace. Eventually, she retreated, heading upstairs with quiet footsteps. Alone again, I exhaled slowly, feeling the careful precision of my plan gradually clicking into place. Over the following weeks, my network quietly expanded, private investigators discreetly gathering evidence, Robert setting up legal protections, and subtle conversations with friends slowly reshaping perceptions without alerting Diane or Tom. Each evening I returned home, calm, collected, controlled, and determined. Emotions never betrayed me, even as I watched my marriage crumble piece by careful piece. Then one evening, I sat out on the porch beside Eleanor. She watched neighbors pass by slowly, sipping iced tea, the glass sweating in the humid air. "Jack," she finally spoke up, turning slowly towards me. "I taught history for 40 years. Saw lots of patterns, lots of mistakes repeated. The secret to winning any battle isn't force, but timing." I looked at her, amused but unsurprised by her perceptiveness. "You're observant, Eleanor." She shrugged gently, eyes sparkling with wisdom. "Comes with the territory. Just make sure you don't act too soon, or too late." "I won't," I promised quietly, looking out toward the peaceful bay. My cell vibrated quietly in my pocket. Another message from Mike. "We've got everything. Whenever you're ready." I slipped the phone back, feeling the weight of the moment. Diane had made her choice. Tom had made his. Now I'd make mine. Carefully, deliberately, with no room for weakness. No shouting, no accusations, just carefully orchestrated consequences. The enemy had moved recklessly. I'd respond with precision. This wasn't revenge, but justice. The following morning, I sat calmly in Robert's downtown Annapolis office, reviewing the carefully compiled files. Documents and evidence formed neat stacks across his polished mahogany desk, the window behind him offering a peaceful view of sailboats drifting slowly on the Chesapeake. Everything was in place, down to the smallest detail. Robert tapped a pen thoughtfully against his palm. "Jack, we're in excellent shape legally. You've managed your affairs meticulously. Investments are secure, the trusts fully protected. Frankly, Diane won't see this coming." "I appreciate it, Robert," I replied, folding my hands calmly. "I don't enjoy this, but she forced my hand. Let's proceed." His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "We can pull the trigger anytime. Just say when." "Friday," I replied without hesitation. "The dividends will clear by then. We'll move it all into the trust before she notices a thing." He smiled faintly, respecting the decisiveness in my tone. "I'll handle the paperwork. This will be airtight." I rose, shaking Robert's hand firmly. "Thanks. Let's end this cleanly." The coming days were normal, deceptively calm. Diane carried on her routine, visits with her friends, phone calls whispered discreetly from another room. I kept quiet, patient, let her believe I was oblivious. Control wasn't about force, it was about timing. Then came Friday. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of our colonial home, illuminating Diane as she watered plants, humming lightly to herself. I watched her a moment, feeling a sharp pang, memories flashing briefly of easier times, laughter echoing across that same sunlit room years ago. But nostalgia had no place here. I squared my shoulders, steadied myself, and spoke clearly. "Diane, we should talk." She glanced up. "About us," I replied calmly. She hesitated, then set down her watering can slowly. "All right." We sat across from each other in the living room, separated by the coffee table we'd bought during our trip to Vermont years earlier. Her eyes darted nervously for a moment, fingers twisting quietly in her lap. "Jack, I held up a hand gently, interrupting her with quiet dignity. "Please, let me speak first." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "We've shared 30 years together, Diane. Good years. Respectable years. I've always trusted you implicitly. I'm not the kind of man who doubts lightly, and you know that." Her expression faltered slightly, fingers clenching tighter in her lap. "I don't know exactly when things changed," I continued, "but they did. Maybe it was boredom, maybe something I lacked. It doesn't matter. What matters is honesty." She inhaled sharply, starting to speak, then stopped. Her eyes searched mine, realizing that denial wasn't an option here. "I saw Tom's messages." I stated simply, without bitterness. "I know what's going on." Her face turned pale, shock briefly overtaking her carefully managed features. "Jack, it was never about hurting you." I raised a hand gently, stopping her words. "No, it probably wasn't. But betrayal is betrayal. Let's call it what it is." She straightened her shoulders, regaining some composure. "Jack, this marriage, it's become predictable, stagnant. I needed more." "Predictable isn't always bad," I replied evenly. I gave you stability, security, things most people long for. But clearly that wasn't enough. She leaned forward, eyes fierce again. Jack, Tom listens to me, challenges me intellectually. Our life had become predictable. You have your career, your diplomatic missions. What did I have? Book clubs and charity lunches. You had your dignity, I answered firmly. We both did. There was silence between us, heavy and final. Diane exhaled sharply, leaning back into the sofa, clearly unsettled but not broken. What happens now? She asked, voice subdued. I looked steadily at her. I've moved our finances into a trust. It's done, Diane. The house, investments, all of it secured. You won't be penniless, but you won't profit from betrayal either. Her expression shifted, disbelief crossing her features. You already did that? It was necessary, I replied, maintaining my calm. Anger flared briefly, quickly controlled as she rose abruptly, pacing to the window. You're punishing me? No, I said clearly. I'm protecting myself. Protecting what I've spent my life building. You made your choice, Diane. I made mine. She turned sharply, voice edged. You're acting as if this is some negotiation, a damn international treaty. We're talking about our marriage. Yes, I responded evenly. And trust, like treaties, relies on integrity. Diane stared at me, weighing her next words carefully. Finally, she sighed, resignation softening her shoulders slightly. What happens now? We both move on, respectfully, I answered clearly. There won't be shouting matches or public spectacles. We don't owe each other that. She stood quietly, absorbing it all. I underestimated you. No, I replied, voice unwavering. You misjudged my restraint for weakness. That was your mistake. She nodded slowly, turning away. Fair enough, Jack. The following weeks were methodical, not emotional. Lawyers took over the details, neatly orchestrating the separation of our lives. Friends picked sides quietly, social invitations slowed, but I accepted the solitude with dignity. It wasn't pleasant, but it was right. Then came Tom. The news arrived through Mike one evening over beers at McGarvey's, our usual downtown pub. Mike leaned forward, keeping his voice low and confidential. Tom's having a tough time at work, Mike reported. Henry Farrell's keeping him on a tight leash now. He won't make another promotion, that's for sure. Good, I replied evenly. That's on him, not me. Mike smiled faintly, lifting his beer. Jack, you amaze me. If it were me. I know exactly what you do, I interrupted gently, smiling slightly. But this needed finesse, not force. Days turned into weeks. My new routine felt solitary yet liberating. Mornings were spent jogging along the Chesapeake Bay, evenings reading quietly on the porch. Then one Sunday morning, while sipping coffee and glancing at headlines, my phone buzzed sharply. It was Diane's older sister, Margaret, voice tense, defensive. Jack, Diane told us you've cut her off financially. Is that really necessary? I paused carefully. Maggie, there's more to it than that. She pressed harder. She's devastated, Jack. She says you're trying to ruin her. Quietly, I opened a folder on the desk in front of me, pulling out photos and hotel receipts, speaking gently but firmly. Maggie, I don't want a battle, and I didn't start one. Diane made choices that led us here. There was a tense silence. What are you talking about? I'll send you the evidence. Then decide who's been betrayed. Within days, Diane's own family pulled back from her, embarrassed by the evidence I calmly presented. The betrayal, now undeniable, became hers alone to bear. Through it all, I never allowed bitterness to take hold. Anger is weakness, dignity is power. I rose each morning and headed to my office in Washington, mediating conflicts far more volatile than my own, knowing the real strength lay in self-control and decisiveness. Late one evening, alone in my study, I gazed out over the bay, quiet and reflective. Diane's belongings were boxed, ready for removal. I'd lost a partner, yes, but I'd regained something far more important, self-respect. Life wasn't over, it was just beginning again, this time on my terms. My evenings were quieter, spent reading in the study or jogging along the waterfront, absorbing the calm predictability that had long defined my disciplined existence. At 62, I was hardly interested in becoming a bitter old man nursing grudges. Instead, I'd focus on moving forward, steady and deliberate. Yet, fate had a way of testing resolve. One afternoon, after mediating a particularly tense diplomatic session involving two ambassadors from opposing nations, I received an unexpected visitor at my Washington office. Henry appeared at my door. Jack, mind if I come in? Of course, I motioned. standing briefly to greet him with a firm handshake. Henry stepped in slowly, settling into the leather chair across from me, adjusting his sleeves nervously. Something was off. Henry rarely fidgeted. Everything okay? He hesitated briefly before meeting my gaze. I spoke with Tom. He came clean. I kept my expression calm, carefully neutral. Go ahead. Henry cleared his throat. Tom admitted it all, said it wasn't planned. Things just got out of control. He's been spiraling lately. Work suffered. Marriage too. I'm considering disciplinary action. I leaned back slightly, regarding him with measured calm. Do whatever you think is appropriate, Henry. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. Henry nodded, relief briefly crossing his hardened features. I admire your restraint, Jack. Can't say I do the same. I've found revenge serves no purpose, I answered evenly. It weakens more than it heals. Henry smiled faintly, rising again. Well, you're better than most of us. I saw him out, returning to the quiet of my office. Tom Wilson's fate didn't particularly interest me. My life was my focus now, and that felt right. Several weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, I visited my neighbor Eleanor Richards, the retired school teacher. She was seated comfortably on her porch, reading an old novel, looking up with a welcoming smile as I approached. Jack, good afternoon, she greeted warmly, eyes bright behind her glasses. Come sit. Tea. I'd appreciate that, I replied, settling into a rocking chair beside her. Eleanor handed me a glass, studying my face in her perceptive way. You look better, she said thoughtfully. Lighter. I took a slow sip, enjoying the cool breeze. I feel clearer, I admitted quietly. She nodded knowingly. I saw Diane the other day at the market. She's leaving Annapolis, did you hear? I did, I replied, untroubled. I hope she finds peace wherever she goes. Eleanor eyed me carefully. And you, Jack? Will you stay here? Absolutely, I replied without hesitation. This is home. Nothing changes that. Good, she said firmly. Too many people run after trouble. Better to stand your ground. Fix what's yours. I smiled faintly, grateful for Eleanor's steady wisdom, her calm practicality. Monday morning came with fresh responsibilities at work. The State Department assigned me to mediate tense negotiations in Washington between a pair of rival countries whose relationship had soured to the brink of violence. After my years of service, situations like these were comfortably familiar, emotions high, diplomacy fragile, stakes immense. Just how I liked it. Lately, though, it seems like diplomacy has vanished altogether, as if world leaders have forgotten it exists when speaking to one another. I believe it's time for diplomats to intervene and negotiate. After all, that's their duty, and it's more essential now than ever. Entering the meeting room in Foggy Bottom, the assembled delegates, stern-faced men in dark suits, watched me carefully. I offered a calm nod, shaking hands firmly, projecting quiet confidence as we settled around the polished oak table. Gentlemen, I began, my voice steady, conversational yet firm. Our countries may differ greatly, but diplomacy isn't about winning battles. It's about solving problems before they escalate into irreversible mistakes. The meeting unfolded slowly, each side presenting grievances with heated words, accusations flying across the table. I listened carefully, guiding discussions with deliberate precision, weaving through disputes as skillfully as navigating a minefield, something I'd mastered decades before. Finally, after hours of delicate negotiation, the men around the table began nodding reluctantly, compromises slowly emerging. When the session ended, the delegates filed out slowly, one ambassador pausing briefly to speak privately. Colonel Callahan, I must say, your composure amazes me. How do you remain so calm under pressure? Practice, I answered quietly, and understanding that strength isn't about shouting loudest. It's about speaking the right words at precisely the right time. He shook my hand with renewed respect. You taught me something today. Returning home that evening, tired but satisfied, I found Mike Farrell waiting for me on my porch steps. Evening, Mike, I greeted him, sensing his tension. Something wrong. He stood slowly, exhaling heavily. Ran into Tom today. I raised an eyebrow. And he was begging for forgiveness, Mike continued carefully. He and Beth are separating. The man's pretty broken, Jack. I regarded Mike calmly, without sympathy. Choices have consequences. Mike chuckled bitterly, shaking his head. He asked me to talk to you. Thinks you might intercede with Henry to save his job. I smiled slightly, shaking my head slowly. Mike, tell Tom he's mistaken. This isn't personal, it's principle. Mike relaxed slightly, offering a nod of approval. Figured you'd say that. Just had to pass along the message. I clapped his shoulder lightly. Thanks, Mike. You're a good friend. He smirked, visibly relieved, turning toward his truck. You handled this better than I would have. I respect that. Days slipped quietly by, steady and reassuringly routine. Then one afternoon, a knock at the front door interrupted my reading. Opening it, I found Diane standing there, composed but nervous, her eyes uncertain. Jack, she said softly. May I come in? I stepped aside, calm but guarded. Of course. Inside, she glanced around uneasily, clearly aware of the life she'd willingly walked away from. She sat slowly, eyes avoiding mine until she finally spoke. I've made mistakes, she admitted quietly, voice shaking slightly. Tom was exciting, new. But it didn't last. It wasn't real. I listened patiently, offering no interruption. She continued carefully. I made a terrible mistake, Jack. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. Maybe it's too late, but I owed you this much. I nodded slowly, meeting her gaze firmly. I appreciate you telling me, Diane. But you're right, it's too late. She stood silently for a moment, emotions crossing her face, before finally nodding in acceptance. You're a good man, Jack. Always have been. I walked her gently to the door, offering one final nod. Goodbye, Diane. Closing the door, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just clarity. Diane had made her decisions, and I'd made mine. Now, finally, the past was truly behind me. Winter arrived gently in Annapolis, snow dusting the rooftops and sidewalks, softening the edges of a turbulent year. One crisp Saturday morning in early January, as snowflakes drifted slowly from a slate-gray sky, I received a call from Henry Cooper. His voice was somber, controlled as always. Jack, Tom resigned yesterday. Thought you should know. I paused only briefly, weighing the news. Probably for the best, I said calmly. His wife left him too, Henry continued carefully. He's blaming everyone but himself. I sighed quietly. Tom chose his path. We all have to face the consequences eventually. Henry chuckled dryly. I told him as much. Thought you'd appreciate the closure. Thanks, Henry. I do. As we hung up, the reality settled around me quietly. Tom had betrayed trust on every front. Now the consequences were unfolding naturally. Life at the State Department filled my days with purpose and my evenings with reflection. Younger diplomats began seeking me out more often, drawn perhaps to the steadiness that comes with experience. Their respect brought satisfaction. Mentorship was natural to me. Walking home through the quiet, snow-lined streets, I spotted Eleanor sitting bundled warmly on her porch, book in hand despite the chill. She waved me over with a small smile. Bit cold to be sitting outside, isn't it? I asked gently. She chuckled softly. Never too cold to see what's happening around me. Old teacher habits. I settled onto the porch steps beside her, breathing in the crisp winter air. Eleanor turned slowly, fixing her perceptive gaze on me. You've handled things well, Jack. I've watched you this year. Quiet strength, it's rare nowadays. Just doing what's necessary, I answered simply. She nodded, thoughtful. You know, people underestimate the quiet ones. But in the end, they're always the strongest. I smiled appreciatively. I'll remember that. Weeks later, on a clear January evening, a diplomatic event drew me to Washington's National Press Club. I mingled comfortably among ambassadors and senators, exchanging polite conversation over glasses of scotch and polite laughter. It felt natural, a return to familiar territory. Midway through the evening, a young diplomat approached me tentatively, extending his hand. Colonel Callahan, I'm Richard Keller from State. I've followed your career, sir. It's an honor. I shook his hand warmly. Pleasure's mine, son. What do you do at State? Middle East policy, he answered confidently. I'm still learning the ropes. I've been told you're the man to watch. I smiled faintly, nodding toward a quieter corner of the room. Come over here. Let's talk. We spent the next hour discussing strategies, exchanging ideas on the delicate art of negotiation. His questions were intelligent, perceptive. It reminded me of myself decades earlier, eager yet cautious. The conversation felt natural, easy, genuine. This was where I belonged, mentoring those coming up behind me, helping them avoid mistakes I'd seen others make. I appreciate your insight, sir, the young man said earnestly as we finished. My door's always open, I replied warmly. Remember, diplomacy isn't about forcing your hand. It's knowing when to speak and when to hold your silence. The next day, back at home, Robert called with news of final paperwork. It's finished, Jack, he said with quiet satisfaction. Everything's settled. You can finally move on. I already have, I said calmly. Thanks, Robert. Late that evening, sitting alone by the fire, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The house felt different now, calmer, clearer. Diane had texted briefly, updating me she planned to move to a small condo in Baltimore. Tom had disappeared from my social circle entirely, retreating quietly, perhaps ashamed. As flames flickered in the fireplace, warming the room, I found myself reflecting quietly, not on betrayal, but on the strength required to move past it without bitterness. People had expected anger, bitterness, resentment. But I'd chosen differently, held firm by self-control rather than vengeance. Life had tested me, yes, but hadn't broken me. I took a slow sip from my glass, savoring the peaceful silence of my home. The strength wasn't in destroying the enemy, it was in rising above them, continuing forward unshaken. Life wasn't about revenge, it was about dignity, composure, and quiet victory. I'd never lost sight of that, and now I understood it even better. One afternoon, after finishing up a particularly tense negotiation involving trade disputes in Europe, my supervisor, Ambassador James Keller, called me into his spacious, oak-paneled office. "Jack, you've done exceptional work," he began plainly, leaning forward and fixing me with his trademark intense gaze. "We've noticed." I nodded politely, appreciative but composed. "Just doing my job, Ambassador." "No false modesty here," Keller chuckled quietly, pushing a document across his polished desk. "The Secretary has recommended you for Special Envoy status. The Senate's already reviewing it. If approved, you'll represent us directly in sensitive international mediations. It's an enormous responsibility, Jack." I stared down at the official letter, the embossed State Department seal catching the late afternoon sun. "It's an honor," I finally replied evenly, meeting Keller's gaze. "And a challenge I'm ready for." Keller smiled approvingly. "We need people who project stability, strength without bluster. You've always had that, Jack. It's why they picked you." Later that evening, as I walked through the historic district toward my favorite restaurant, Cantler's, nestled along Mill Creek, Mike Farrell called. His voice was subdued, hesitant, unusual for Mike. "Jack," Tom reached out again. "He's not doing well. Lost the house. His marriage is done." I listened carefully, exhaling slowly, breath visible in the chilly evening air. "Mike, what exactly does he want?" Mike hesitated briefly. "He's desperate, Jack. Wants your forgiveness, thinks it'll somehow fix his mess." I paused, standing under a street lamp casting a pale glow. "Forgiveness is possible, Mike, but forgetting isn't." Mike sighed audibly. "You don't owe him anything." "Maybe not," I replied, voice quiet but resolute. "But closure isn't weakness, Mike. Tell Tom to come see me tomorrow." Mike sighed audibly, relieved. "You're a better man than most, Jack." The following evening, Tom arrived at the house, shoulders hunched, hands deep in his coat pockets, face drawn. Tom spoke first, voice shaky. "Jack, I've made a complete mess. I've lost almost everything." I nodded, watching him without hostility. "Tom, choices have consequences. You knew that when you crossed the line." "I know," he admitted, lowering his eyes. "I wasn't thinking straight. I destroyed everything, your marriage, my career." "Yes, you did," I replied gently. "But admitting it shows integrity. That's a start." He raised his eyes slowly, searching my face carefully. "Jack, why aren't you angry?" I answered honestly. "But anger isn't productive. It's destructive, distracting. My entire life has taught me to control my emotions, not let them control me." He shook his head slowly. "You've handled this so calmly, like it didn't even touch you." "Trust me, it touched me deeply," I replied, voice steady. "But it didn't break me. It reminded me of who I am, and who I refuse to become." Tom swallowed hard, nodding slightly. "I came here expecting anger or hate, maybe even fists. I don't know how to handle kindness." I looked directly at him. "This isn't kindness, Tom. It's decency. I won't waste energy on anger or revenge. But neither will I pretend it didn't happen." He exhaled sharply, nodding in understanding. "Fair enough." Weeks passed calmly afterward, and one afternoon I received word that the Senate confirmed my nomination as Special Envoy. Work became busier, more fulfilling than ever. Young diplomats continued coming to me for advice, eager for my perspective. A few months had passed since Diane's quiet exit, and my life settled comfortably into familiar rhythms. Work kept me busy, fulfilling missions abroad, negotiating fragile truces with the confidence that only experience could bring. My appointment as Special Envoy had been announced publicly, an honor that felt earned through patience rather than aggression. The pride I felt wasn't arrogance, it was justified satisfaction after years spent navigating stormy seas. One afternoon, Returning home early after a successful diplomatic summit in Geneva, I found a handwritten note slipped carefully beneath my front door. It was Eleanor's neat handwriting, short and simple. "Congratulations, Jack. You've earned every bit of this." I smiled slightly, grateful for her wisdom. Neighbors like Eleanor didn't miss much, their quiet respect speaking volumes. Annapolis had always been a tight-knit town, people loyal to integrity, quietly dismissive of those who violated the trust. Diane and Tom had drifted out of sight, absorbed by their own choices. I felt neither sorrow nor joy at their absence, only the calm satisfaction of a job completed. Late one afternoon, Mike Farrell appeared unexpectedly at my doorstep, grinning as he tossed a pair of fishing rods into his truck bed. "Grab your gear, Colonel," he called, a grin breaking through his rugged features. "We're going out on the water." "Don't have to ask twice," I replied, grabbing a windbreaker. Soon, we were easing out of the harbor, the boat gliding effortlessly across the Chesapeake. Mike settled beside me, eyes scanning the calm horizon. "How you holding up, Jack?" "Better than I expected," I answered truthfully. "Life is good, Mike. No regrets." He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the water. "You're stronger than I'd have been, brother. I'd probably still be fighting." "I learned long ago," I said quietly. "Fighting battles isn't about revenge. It's about surviving long enough to outlast your opponents." Mike chuckled softly, nodding his head in appreciation. "I'll drink to that." We cast our lines, sitting in companionable silence, enjoying the calm simplicity of fishing on the open bay. No words necessary, just two men comfortable in their own skin, recognizing strength and friendship through quiet solidarity. Several weeks later, I returned home from a long negotiation abroad, a successful mediation between two bitter rivals that had finally signed a peace agreement after years of conflict. I received a handwritten note from Secretary Gordon himself. "Outstanding work, Colonel. We're lucky to have your wisdom and diplomacy. Keep up the good fight." I placed the note proudly in my study, beside my Marine Corps medals and framed photographs of long-ago battles. Yet somehow, it meant more than medals or recognition. It was proof that integrity and discipline hadn't just carried me through betrayal. They had carried me forward, stronger and more respected than ever. One evening, as summer approached again, a knock at the front door broke my quiet reflections. Opening it, I found Richard Keller, the young diplomat I'd mentored, standing respectfully on the doorstep, holding a bottle of expensive bourbon. "Colonel Callahan," he greeted warmly. "Just wanted to thank you properly. I've been assigned overseas, negotiating alongside Ambassador Keller himself. I couldn't leave without showing my appreciation." I shook his hand firmly, welcoming him inside. "Good man, Richard. Proud of you." Later, we sat comfortably in my study, quietly sipping bourbon, sharing war stories and diplomatic lessons. "You know, Colonel," Richard said thoughtfully, swirling the drink in his glass, "everyone at State says you never lose your cool, no matter what hits you." I laughed softly. "Years of practice." He smiled knowingly. "But it's more than that. I've watched you, sir. It's control, discipline, calm under fire. I want to be that man someday." I regarded him steadily, nodding slowly. "You already are. Just keep choosing dignity over drama." Richard raised his glass, eyes sincere. "To dignity, Colonel." My battles had never been won through anger or retaliation. Victory came from composure, dignity, and quiet courage. If you enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe to the channel.